In this video, you're going to learn how you can find a new worship team member to join your worship team this Sunday. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com. This is the place where we talk about how to lead yourself well, lead your church well, and lead worship well. So if you're interested in that, click subscribe down below and let's get into it, because in this video, you're going to learn how you can find somebody to join your worship team this Sunday. I'm not talking about like they'll be leading beside you on Sunday. I'm just talking about you'll be able to identify somebody in your church that can join your worship team this Sunday. We're going to learn all about that. This video is going to be sort of short today because at the end of the video, I'm going to have a resource that I'm going to point you to that'll give you a lot more in-depth information on this process. But let's get into it. What is the process for finding somebody to join your worship team this Sunday? All right, we're going to keep things super simple, and it's simply this. The first step is to identify. We need to identify somebody to lead them through the rest of the steps in the process. So, how do you find somebody? Think of the people in your church. Here's the thought process I'm going to give you, and by the end of this, you're going to have at least one person that you have in mind to ask to join your worship team this Sunday. I want you to think of 3 people, not just one person, but 3 people in your church that you could ask to join your worship team this Sunday. And I know at first that's going to seem really difficult, because if you've already identified them, you probably would have already had them on your team by this point. But here is the key distinction for this Sunday. This is what's different this time, is I don't want you to say no for people. I don't want you to think of somebody in your head and think of all the reasons that they couldn't join the worship team. This is something that I've had to learn in ministry over the years, is that I say no for people way too often. I always think of somebody to do something in church, and then I think, nah, they're probably not interested in that. No, they're probably busy. They can't do that. I don't want you to have those thoughts in your head as you brainstorm this list of 3 people. I just want you to think who is a potential possibility to join your worship team, and then not be afraid to ask them. Don't say no for them. Allow them, if the answer is no, allow them the opportunity to say no for themselves, because a few things are going to happen. Number one, they might not say no, and you might have been, and you were probably wrong about all the reasons that they couldn't serve on your worship team. Like maybe you're asking a dad who just had a new child born in their family, and you're thinking, well, they have a new kid in their life, so they're probably not going to be on the worship team because they got a new baby to take care of. But what you might not realize is that dad is actually looking for a night to get out during the week, and it would be such a blessing to your church because you'd have another person serving on your worship team, but also a blessing to that dad who just had a child, and maybe they've got a couple other children, and they're just looking for like one little excuse to get out of the house for one night during the week for a couple hours, and their wife would be completely fine with it. But in our heads, we've said, no, they're way too busy. They could never do this. So we might be wrong about their situation, and they might say yes. So that's why we don't want to say no for people. We want to give people the opportunity to say no for themselves, if that is the answer. Another thing that happens is even if they do say no, they'll be honored in the process. There have been like so many times in my church leading where I've asked somebody to do something, and maybe I was just like completely wrong with their skill set. I had this happen recently. I went up and asked somebody, would you be interested in running sound? And they were like, they laughed. They were like, I have no idea where you got that idea from, that I would be a good fit for that, but I'm like the last person that you want leading sound. And I felt like weird for a little bit because I'm like, how did I get that wrong? But then what everybody always says after they say something like that is, but I'm honored that you asked me. Thank you so much for asking. And I think so often in ministry, we make excuses for people about why they can't do certain things, and maybe we're right in that, but people are just waiting sometimes to be asked. So don't say no for them. Even if they say no for themselves, they're still honored in the process that you thought of them. So the first step is I want you to identify, I say 3 people, let's say 1 to 3 people that you can ask to join your worship team. And what's going to be different this time? What's going to be different is you aren't going to say no for them in advance. I guarantee you can find at least one person in your church that you've said no to already in your head. You've said no for them, maybe not no to them, but you've said no for them and made these excuses why they probably couldn't join your worship team. Just write them down, and then we'll move on to step number 2. The second thing that you need to do to get someone to join your worship team this Sunday, are you ready for this one? This one's crazy, but you have to ask them. You have to go up to them and say, hey, would you like to join the worship team? I know that seems super obvious, but how often do we not do that? What's the first thing you think of when you're like, I'm going to find more worship team members? I should probably put an announcement slide up, right? Worship team, looking for new worship team members. See me to apply. No, that's not the best way. That's not even probably in the top 10 ways to find new worship team members. I still think it's beneficial a little bit because it doesn't take much time to do to put together a worship slide for your announcements. But the most effective way to find somebody to join your worship team is to go to them personally and ask them. That's what they're waiting for. And in fact, most high-capacity volunteers are people who are waiting to be asked. They aren't going to come up to you and be like, hey, Spencer, I'm really good at singing. I need to be on your worship team, right? No, if we want to find high-capacity worship team volunteers, we have to go to them and find them, and they will feel valued in that process. And then that's how we find high-capacity worship team volunteers. So all of that to say is you wrote down that one person, or you thought of that one person that you could ask. Now, I want you to go and actually ask them on Sunday. Don't just expect them to magically see the announcement slide that you put together. Go to them and ask them personally, and that's going to force them, not in a negative way, but it's going to force them to say yes or no, because you have presented the question to them. Whenever it's just a question or a announcement on an announcement slide, they can be like, maybe, like, they're probably not talking to me, so I'll just kind of fly under the radar here. I don't really want to get involved. But when you go to them and you ask them, I don't know why I looked like I was going to punch somebody, but when you go to them and ask them one-on-one, you are saying, hey, I want to hear, do you want to join the worship team? And then they have to either say yes or no. So you force them into a decision, not in a bad way, but you cause them to act and take initiative. So that is the second thing you need to do. First, we've identified somebody. Now we've asked them. What comes next? Finally, number 3, in order to get people onto your worship team this Sunday, we've identified them, we've asked them, now what? We need to lead them through the process for joining our worship team. Do you have a process for getting people onto your worship team? Because it's not just going to magically happen. It's not like somebody's just going to walk into your church some Sunday and be like, hey, I want to join the worship team, and then all of a sudden they're going to be leading worship with you, right? That's not how it works. There's a process that we go through that can get people onto our worship team. So do you have a process? Do you know, is there an application form that they fill out? Do they do an interview with them? What do auditions look like for your team? Let's say they pass all of those things. Now what? Are they just leading with you on Sunday? Or like, come lead with me next Sunday? Or is there something else in the process? If we want to get people to join our worship team, we have to have that process in place. And this is what I was talking about at the beginning of this video. I said there was a more in-depth resource that I wanted to point you to, and that resource is called the Worship Team Growth Plan. It's a training that I just released this week. You can find a link to it down in the description below. In that in-depth training, I teach you this process that you need. I teach you from beginning to end how to find, recruit and develop high-capacity worship team volunteers. So in that training, there's more to it than just the process. I also show you where to look for new worship team volunteers and how to ask them and how to make sure that they stay on your team. But in that training, I also share with you the process, a step-by-step process that you can use to get people onto your worship team. So we talk about everything from an application. I give you an application that you can actually use in your worship ministry. We talk about like the worship ministry overview, the vision for your worship ministry, and the code of conduct, that document that you should be giving new worship team members. I give you a document that you can pretty much just copy and paste and use in your worship ministry. We talk about worship team auditions and how to run those. And then, of course, once somebody gets on to the team, how do they actually get to leading on Sundays with us? I cover all of that in the worship team growth plan. So make sure to check that out down in the description below. I just launched it this week. I'm super excited about it. So if you want to grow your worship team this year and recruit and develop high capacity volunteers, that's how you do it. Check it out down in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.